Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again this afternoon. We are happy to have you. My name is John Shoemaker.
And I'm Kaylin Markman.
And we are here today to talk to you about tomorrow. Tomorrow, we are saying, is the first day of school again. That's basically how we are phrasing these kinds of things. So school starts back up again tomorrow, as you all know. And so what we decided is we just wanted to review some things that maybe you had not already thought about before working remotely with your students. One of the most important things ahead of time, I want to let you know this is being recorded. It is live on YouTube. We are a couple of seconds, up to 20 seconds behind you or ahead of you. So we do have people in the chat box who have little wrenches next to their name. They are our moderators, and they are there to assist with any questions you might have. We're going to try to continue to work this as a conversation. So when you see the prompts that are posted in the chat box, please respond and help us continue this conversation as we go through it. In addition, this video will be posted within just a few seconds after YouTube ends it. So you can check out our channel down below. You can also subscribe and hit the bell to subscribe to what we have. All of our resources are also posted to edtechtraining.palmbeachschools.org. We are, as quickly as we can, getting everything up there. There's a lot of information we're trying to push out. So just know that if you do see some pages, they might be under construction, but they will be live soon with more updated information. So feel free to keep checking back. We are so thankful to have all of you guys. So most of you know me by now. My name's John from EdTech, and I'm joined by...
I'm Kaylin Markman, and I work in the Division of Teaching and Learning.
So we're here again to talk about hitting that reset button. We're seeing tomorrow as that first day of school. And so now we are finding ourselves at a place where a lot of us haven't been before. It's really a new frontier. And so we're here to really try to help talk you through some of the things that you may not have thought about previously. And we do talk about this with a big asterisk on it, which is the caveat being, remember that we are not your administrators. We are not your principals. We're just simply guiding you in some conversation. So always remember that your administrator is the final person to tell you what they expect out of you starting tomorrow. So if there are any questions about what you are expected to do or what is expected of you, please reach out to your administrators and they can let you know. We're really just trying to get you to think of some things that you may not have thought about with remote learning. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kaylin, who will begin the conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. You know, as John and I have been speaking over the last couple of weeks and talking with various educators that are not only colleagues but friends, a lot of things were popping up, and this idea of this webinar came from that because of our discussions. And I kept thinking, this is great. We have a ton of content. We have great platforms, but are we really thinking about what that first day is going to look like? So when you start to think of what it means to hit a reset button, to start over, whether that's, you know, in the midst of a Super Mario game, or that's restarting a phone or resetting a phone or resetting a computer to factory settings, I kind of feel like that's the space that we're in right now. And we need to be cognizant of the things we would do as an educator at the start of the year, because essentially we are starting over. Although we do have, there's a lot of things in our favor with this reset. And I think that that's what we want to talk about today, and then look at some of the things that we should probably be considering if we haven't already. So one of the things that as educators we're really good about is establishing routines. We know that consistency is key, and it's imperative that we set up routines for everything. And in the very beginning of a school year, we're really good about establishing those routines. So in this new venture that we're moving into, we want to think about our routines for the hours of live classes. If we're going to have a live class, when is that happening? And what does that routine look like? And within that live class, what do those routines look like? Are you going to have office hours? Office hours, and allow me to clarify because I've heard from a lot of teachers, especially today, an office hour isn't necessarily the same thing as a live class, right? So when you think back to college and a professor having office hours, those were blocks of time for people to come if they needed help. Some days you may have 10 people that show up and need your assistance, and other days you have none. So as we're suggesting, whether that's a Google Meet and to be online, we're not suggesting that the entire time is spent giving a live lecture, if you are even going to do them live. So just keep that in mind. What are your routines for posting work? And I mean you personally, when you post work. So what time will that be done by every day? When, as a student, could I expect that of you? What are the routines that you would put into play for the students posting back or responding to their work? Handing in work. Obviously, we're using Classroom, and it's a fantastic platform. But think about the other platforms you might be using. So whether that is, for example, in science, secondary science, we use STEMscopes as one of our platforms. We do have other publishers that we use, but STEMscopes is a really robust digital program. So teachers might be using that, but make sure that we're crystal clear on our routines, because if we're using STEMscopes to assign things as well as Classroom, our kids need to be really crystal clear on what that looks like. Taking attendance. And this is something I'm going to have John speak to for a moment and then talk about ParentLink, and I'll come back.
For sure. And we've shared in almost every session that we do have some resources for you on our Google Classroom page to take attendance. The district recommended some guidelines for attendance, such as students are posting in Google Classroom, among other things. We did create a nice, easy little form, and that way you can have students fill out that form each day, and you have a list of attendance. Keep in mind your principal and admin may have some other idea on how they're expecting attendance. And also, in the end, attendance still needs to be entered into the official attendance record, which is the SIS. So even if you're getting attendance through a form, or maybe you have students respond to a post each day, you need to make sure you do take that attendance in the SIS each day as well. Along with that, teachers do have access to ParentLink, which is the system that we normally use to make the call out to the parent. That's how you would probably be most familiar with what ParentLink is. It's those phone calls that you get all the time from the district office. Your principal has that, but you also have, if you have classes, you can actually log into the portal, click on the ParentLink tile, and if you have classes, they're populated in there, so then you can send messages and texts. I do not know if teachers have the ability to send a call out, but at least you can send a text message or an email to the parents, for example, right now, letting them know that tomorrow your class will be starting inside of Google Classroom, and you're going to have all your work posted by a certain time, and you might have some office hours tomorrow, letting them know that students can come and chat with you as you get started. So ParentLink is a great way that you can get the message out there, get your kids into Classroom, and then move on from there. And
speaking to the attendance piece, you want to make that consistent as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, about whatever your non-negotiables are, but whatever method that you're going to use to take attendance. So if attendance for you is going to serve as, for example, filling out a brief Google form about, just a check-in every day about how kids are feeling, or if it's a bell ringer, whatever that attendance piece is, I would recommend that stays very consistent so that it's not lost on the students. As we know that obviously routines and expectations are crucial for any successful classroom. It really is the foundation of a successful classroom, right? Without routines or expectations, you can have the greatest content. You could be the most dynamic teacher, but things just seem to go off the rails sometimes. So it's really important as we transition into this that we consider our expectations as well. I don't know, John, if there's any ideas out there yet, or if I should just keep going.
Yeah, keep going. There's just some things on etiquette and stuff, which we will talk about in a little bit.
Perfect. Okay, great. So going back to what I was saying about routines and expectations, we know that this transition happened really quickly. And we didn't have necessarily a long time to move into this new world that we find ourselves in. So what's really going to be important now is not only having expectations, but ones that are realistic. And realistic expectations with very much a growth mindset. Honestly, guys, this is our new norm. And think about this. I know that my norm on a Saturday night was not watching live musicians perform from their living room. I'm not saying that this is a bad new norm. It's actually quite exciting, but it's a different new norm. So we have to really be cognizant of the fact that this is not going to be business as usual straight out of the gate. You may have been rocking and rolling, right, a couple weeks ago and had everything moving like a well-oiled machine. These kids are now coming back to school, or we're hitting that reset button, starting over day one, and they don't know where the 8,000 building is. They don't know how to get the bus. They don't know where they're picking up their schedule. They don't know who their guidance counselor is. And all of those things that you work on in the very, very beginning of the year, we need to be thinking about now. So again, going back to having realistic expectations, really important. The digital citizenship piece is crucial as we're venturing into this. In the past, you may have used Classroom to push out an assignment, but Google Meet was never open for students, and now it is. So now we have this unique experience where we essentially could have kids communicating in real time with you. So having those expectations set forth and understanding how to behave in Google Classroom and on Meet is really important. And I'll turn that to you for a second, John.
For sure. Rebecca Smikla, who is part of the EdTech team, has created a wonderful site for everyone, which is our TechSafe site. She's trying to keep it up to date as often as possible, but every year schools are supposed to go through the lessons of their grade level so that students go through the digital citizenship piece. However, it's also something that you can use now that we're working remotely. You may want to go see if there are some resources on those pages that may help you set those expectations for how you're expecting your students to behave, because this is a lot different than a classroom with 30 students in it and desks. Like, we're now going to have 25 to 30 kids in a Google chat that we've got to figure out how they are going to respond, how they are just supposed to act in general. So just coming up with those expectations out front, and these could be expectations that change too. That is one thing that is possible as well, where, okay, it didn't work this week, start over next week. You know, letting your students know that you're vulnerable and that we are learning together, and it may not work out this week, but you came up with some great ideas, you found some new stuff online, you talked to some peers, and you try something new next week.
That's a really good point, John. As far as the vulnerability piece goes, we know that vulnerability is one of the very easy ways to generate trust in a relationship. And this is going to be a bumpy road. So expect the obstacles, expect things not to go perfectly, because if we're not willing to take those risks and put ourselves out there to grow, then we're not going to, right? But the only way that we grow is through that space of discomfort. And at first, it may not go well, and that's okay. And your students your expectations of your students should be realistic, and your expectations of yourself. So forgive yourself before you even get started, okay? So you wanna also think about chatting, right? So John brought up the digital citizenship stuff, but as far as chatting in a window, so you can see how we're engaging with comments right now. And you likely can type a lot faster with your two hands than our students. Our students are fantastic texters. They could beat me in a texting race any day. But when it comes to putting two hands on a keyboard, maybe not so much. So having them be able to type out a question quickly enough may be challenging in order to keep that conversation going. So one of the things John and I talked about was having a student simply just throw a question mark into the Google Meet chat box or an exclamation point, for example, whatever symbols you come up with to suggest that they have a question or they have something that they'd like to add to the discussion. And that would be a nice way for me to turn around and say, you know, if let's say that had been John, that I could say, John, I noticed that you have a question. Can you please unmute your mic and ask your question? And that allows a little bit more control of the class, but at the same time, acknowledging John's existence and acknowledging that he has a question. So that's really important. I also want to point out, there are some fantastic individuals in this live stream right now from the Department of Ed Tech that are handling a lot of the questions that people have. One of the things that I would like to suggest to you that I have some schools doing, they'll be presenting a live class every day, but as a team. So take an 8th grade team of science teachers. They're going to, as the 4 people on the team, present a live class every morning, and that will not only allow them to collaborate and encourage that, it probably will also seem a little bit less daunting because there's colleagues to lean on in there, but also so that when, for example, I'm speaking, the other colleagues could essentially respond to some of the questions coming in and handling that. So that's an interesting idea. As far as communicating goes, when you're in a chat, it's really important for us to turn around and acknowledge who we're talking to. So you're going to want to set those expectations forth with kids too. For example, if I wanted to respond to Kelly and I was going to be typing in the chat window right now, I'd want to say at Kelly, you know, so that Kelly knows I'm responding to her. Or if I wanted to disagree, for example, with Kim, how do I disagree with Kim in a way that's appropriate, but I still share my thoughts? So I know that in classrooms, we often give kids discussion stems or sentence stems when we're asking for a summary. I give out my teachers discussion stems often when they're collaborating in group work. This would not be a bad idea to include some discussion stems for your students when you want to support someone's idea, when you want to disagree with somebody. That might all be a really good piece to work on. Expectations for when work is due. This is going to be something that you're going to really need to think about and be flexible on. Everyone is operating in a unique space at this point, right? We have families all working at home, sharing Wi-Fi access. We have multiple siblings sharing devices potentially. So I think that's going to be really important. How do we establish collaboration among other students? So you may have used Classroom in the past to push out assignments, whether that's pushing out a doc, maybe it's a presentation, maybe it's a spreadsheet. But have you ever really looked into having kids collaborate with each other on shared documents? And many of you might have, and if you have those suggestions, please share them forward. But I think that that's really important, how that collaboration works. With several of my schools that I work with, I've talked about potentially putting out a new syllabus. And I don't mean for content, because we know that the content has not changed, right? The standards are still the same. Everyone's teaching their content, but your expectations have changed. What your your rules, your procedures, your guidelines. And I mentioned this in the morning session, and I want to say this again. I want you to be really aware of the difference between a rule and a guideline. And I worked this through actually with some teachers this week. Rules are things that, if they're broken, there's a consequence for it because there's something that had to be done that way. So in my own classroom, I used to have what I called guidelines for success. A guideline for success was that you should be prepared with your materials. If you didn't have your materials, you essentially wouldn't be as successful as if you had them. But what am I realistically going to do when a kid doesn't bring a pencil? It's not a rule because I'm going to give them a pencil. I don't want a kid not to work. So think about your rules versus your guidelines, and think about, and those may adjust as this goes on and you figure your own space out. But think about potentially having a new syllabus and what do those expectations look like, and maybe have kids contribute to them. That's not a bad idea tomorrow to kind of have some conversation with them. And then think of a non-negotiable. We all as teachers have something, right, that we expect of our students daily. Now, if for you that's an exit ticket, maybe that's a bell ringer for you, but that non-negotiable, and that could serve also as that attendance piece that we were talking about, make that non-negotiable within reach. We're all learning right now, and while we want to strive and we want to push people to grow, it also has to be within reach. So keep that in mind as you start to think about what you're going to expect of your students.
Kaylin, I was also going to add something that we shared in our Google Meet session that really hits on some of the things that you're talking about. Our team actually found a great plugin last week for Google Chrome, and we're posting it in the chat now, but it's called Google Chrome Grid View. And so whenever you're on Google Chrome, normally you only see 5 people. Well, this allows you to see a whole gallery of your students. So this was our team meeting this morning as we were talking over our day. So normally you would only get to see a few of your students on the right-hand side, and when they talk, they come forward. This plugin, which all you have to do is install it in Google Chrome, will do this automatically. Now, there are a couple of hiccups if you're doing a presentation or something. You have to turn it on and off. But I know this was a heavily requested feature, and this allows you to kind of keep track of your students as well on one screen instead of like only getting to see like 4 or 5 of them. So keep those things in mind. Keep checking in with all the tips that we are posting with you guys as well. There was also some information in the chat related to this is great for SEL. And that was Kelly. I thought that was kind of great that we're covering the social, emotional, and the technology aspect. First of all, thank you for bringing that up. And as I mentioned, I think you kind of have our script because that goes right into Kaylin's next point.
Yes, thank you, Kelly. You are giving me a perfect segue. So thank you for that. I love that. So while we know that the Department of Curriculum provides you with the what, so we give you the content and we tell you this is what you teach, right? And currently, the Department of Educational Technology is providing you with the how. So we're looking at the platforms, the methods or the vehicles through which the curriculum will be delivered. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. You can have the greatest content in the world. You can have the greatest platforms, the most amazing resources. But if you're not considering the actual student themselves and where we are and where they are, they won't receive the instruction no matter how great it is. So no matter how great the bells and whistles are, we've got to make sure that we are making our students feel safe and supported to move forward with this and take risks with us. So one of the things that you really want to consider is how John mentioned those check-ins. Students right now, they do feel isolated. The thing that I love the most about teaching and learning, and I think it's what I miss I missed it initially with our shift to remote learning is I was missing that connection to people. But now that everyone's gotten so used to video chatting, I get to see all of my friends and colleagues, and it's that indispensable human connection of teaching and learning that is going to be really important that we maintain throughout this time. I think it's crucial. So checking in on students to see how they're feeling is going to be important. And students don't want to see me. They want to see you, their teacher. The impact of a strong student-teacher relationship is, I think, probably it's an undeniable thing for student engagement and student success. Let me say that one more time so that we're crystal clear, because my thoughts were kind of coming out. That strong student-teacher relationship is absolutely the number one piece to impact students' success and achievement. And if you want to engage your students, all you have to do is establish relationships with them. Now, the greatest thing is that we have relationships that we've already curated and crafted over the course of the year. So we just kind of need to give them a little jump start. So creating a safe space where they can communicate and share is going to be really important. So how are we going to do this? Can we do this in small groups? Potentially, right? Can we establish office hours for kids to check in when they need to individually? Absolutely. Maybe it's as simple as posting a prompt, like a Flipgrid prompt for them. And we'll talk about Flipgrid a little bit later, and they're going to do a webinar on it next week. But maybe it's as simple as that. Just tell me how you feel, what's going on. And like I mentioned, staying connected via video. I know the idea of seeing yourself on a screen is terrible. It's terrible for me. Like John and I talk about this, and neither of us want to be on this screen right now. But the kids today grew up in a totally different generation. They love seeing themselves on the screen. They like making TikTok videos. They want to call you on FaceTime. My cousins, I'm like, can you just call me regular? Because my face is not FaceTime ready right now. But the kids today want to be on video, and they really want to see you. I have to say, Kristen Rulison and her team have done a fantastic job of putting together resources on the Instructional Continuity Support Plan website. So please make sure you're checking out those resources. We would love to hear from you as far as some of the opportunities you're thinking of to connect with your students. Anybody think of anything?
Yeah, so we're asking ways that you can connect. Video chatting is great. While we're trying to get some feedback from the audience, trying to pull it out of you guys from the experiences you have, I did share a tweet with the group this morning that I thought was really relevant, and Kaylin spoke to it as well, that it is something great to share, which Susan Barber, don't really know who she was. She just showed up in my timeline on Twitter, but that's how Twitter works sometimes.
Now she's famous.
Right? But I think that she really made a great point that right now it's not the time for pushing the rigor of your assignments. It's not time for long essays. It's not time for throwing out a whole bunch of new ideas of technology. We intentionally did these webinar series so that we would slowly introduce you guys to new technologies throughout the coming weeks. But what we really need to start thinking about is meaningful work in small doses, remembering that you may have a student who has one device at their house and they have 6 brothers and sisters who all need 6 classes a day each day. So thinking about how much work that you're really putting out there, and also how you're going to access and get to your students for their availability, and also that compassionate piece. That's very important right now. As I've chatted with several people, we don't know what's going on with our students' families. Like by this time in the school year, when I was teaching, I knew everything that was going on in their families, like what was going on after school, who was friends with whom. but there's been this break now, and really it's like a whole different time. It doesn't feel like 2 weeks, that's for sure. It feels like we're in a whole different reality. So we don't know what's been going on with those students and in their households these past 2 weeks. Obviously, we're trying to feed students as much as we can, but we don't know. Someone may have gotten sick. Someone may have passed away. So keeping that compassionate ear and remembering that, hey, that assignment might not be that important to that kid if grandma is dying with the coronavirus, right? I mean, keeping that back in the back of your head as we go through this and having those check-ins with your students to see how they're doing. That's a really big component of all this.
Well, and if you can go back to that tweet for a second, John, and the piece about rigor, which I always find this interesting anyway in general, forget now in the remote learning piece, but even when we are in a physical brick and mortar classroom, one of my favorite researchers, Barbara Blackburn, I think has one of the best definitions of rigor, and she defines it in 4 pieces. And one of them is that you have to create an environment that is conducive to learning and taking risks. So honestly, we're not there yet with this new environment, which is probably very much lends itself to why Susan would have said that in the tweet. It's not the time for rigor because we haven't established our environment yet. So that definition where she talks about rigor, she says that not only do we have to create an environment that's conducive to learning, right? We have to ourselves hold students to high expectations, and that's for all students. We have to give students an opportunity to demonstrate that learning and do that in a variety of ways. So that's that voice and choice. And actually what's really nice about that is that this type of environment lends itself really nicely to being able to step into a bit more differentiation because of the situation we find ourselves in. So while it's daunting and a little scary, it's also kind of exciting, and I feel like we're on the brink of something very cool. To speak a little bit to what John mentioned, as far as not knowing what's going on at home, the other thing I want you to keep in mind too, and I don't think we referenced it, we did in the last session, but in this session, with your expectations, every teacher is going to have a different set, okay? Just like you do in the very beginning of the year. And Mr. Shoemaker is the teacher right next door to Miss Markman, and Miss Markman lets us, I'm going to make this up, Ms. Markman lets us chew gum in class and Mr. Shoemaker doesn't, right? Ms. Markman, though, doesn't allow late work, and Mr. Shoemaker does. Every person is going to have a different set of expectations. So having them somewhere where kids can reference them, if I didn't say that before, is going to be really important so that they're able to navigate this remote learning world more efficiently. So having said all of that, let's go ahead and talk about that environment piece, right? Because that lends itself really nicely to that. The benefit of this happening at this time in the year is that you already have these amazing established relationships that you can transition into this new environment. So you're not going to have to recreate the wheel. So that's really nice. But you're going to really want to consider how you choose to engage students. So these relationships have to continue, those informal interactions. Think about when a kid walks up to your classroom door on a Monday. Hey, how was your weekend? See the game? Oh, you saw a movie. Which movie did you see? Those informal interactions that you consistently have with them helps you to develop a stronger relationship over time and have them receptive to your content and your delivery. So I always kind of talk about this as the relationship piece. I talk about this idea of relational capacity. And I read about this one time and I was like, wow, that really stuck with me. The stronger the relationship, the more willing someone is to be inconvenienced by you. So, you know that person that will help you move, or the person that'll take you to the airport at 5 o'clock in the morning? Yeah, that person. I'm gonna bet that you have a really strong relationship with them because they're willing to be that inconvenienced. The teachers that have strong relationships can inconvenience their students even more. So think about how you're going to engage them in this environment. And you are going to want to maintain the sense of community. So how do you do that when you don't see them every day? That might be by sharing a really funny but appropriate meme. So not Tiger King memes. It might be sharing an image or a funny video. And maybe that's not even having to do with your content, but it helps to maintain a sense of community. Start slow. Fewer platforms. We already have Classroom, which is a really robust tool. We also have Meet. And there are some other tools that people are suggesting that are going to be fantastic. But start slow. We can always use Google Classroom or Google Meet for whole group discussions. We can use either one for small groups. You could check in with small groups like I mentioned before. You're going to want to consider your stopping points, your discussions. I mentioned before that the fantastic team members of EdTech are here and they're responding. Let's say I was by myself in this webinar. I would have to really intentionally stop to read all of the chat that's going on so that you don't disengage. Because the second that I don't acknowledge you or acknowledge your presence in the room, just like we do in a classroom if a kid has their hand up, right? So think about that, because remote learning could really serve as another obstacle for our striving students if we're not cognizant of that. So it's crucial. It is so, so important. I cannot stress this enough for our striving students that we're cognizant of when they disengage. So I would really work on that. And if that's putting in a slide for yourself in a presentation to remind yourself to stop, to ask questions, if they need clarity. And I'm also going to ask that you really consider being flexible about the environment. We've seen lots of questions about how are you going to make sure that kids are engaged? How are you going to make sure that they're asking questions? How are you going to make sure that they sign in at the moment that you ask them to? And I don't know if, John, you want to speak to any of that. But I'd love for you guys to share some ideas about how this physical classroom setting or how this remote learning experience is different than that physical classroom setting.
Yeah, I think we talked about, the sign-in sheets and the SEL component. One thing we talked about earlier as well is how do you even keep students' attention? Because I know when I see a 20-minute YouTube video, I really don't know if I want to sit through this for 20 minutes. So imagine you having, first of all, to record a 20-minute video, but then your students having to watch it. Like, I'm talking about these multi-millionaire YouTubers who have a budget of $1 million per video, and I can't sit through it, So keep that in mind. So just chunking video. So maybe I'm only showing 5 minutes of it right now, and we have a discussion somehow about it underneath, or there's some kind of assignment that goes with that. And then showing them another 5-minute video after that. So that becomes your lesson rather than, just a chunk, a huge video and then, a task after that.
And John, that's a great point that you brought up. Because I know on our instructional continuity support plan website, we have listed the suggested timeframes that instruction should take place in based on content area. So I'll use science as an example. There's a 45-minute block of time allocated in middle and high school for science. Am I expecting you to do a 45-minute live lecture? No. I couldn't sit through that. I couldn't sit through my own. Am I expecting you to do a 45-minute recorded lecture? No. Or even taking up that 45-minute block of time with your input. No. Think of your actual everyday instruction in your classroom, right? So we know that good instruction is broken up into cycles, and we take a chunk of information and we cycle through it. So a cycle may look like doing some sort of bell ringer to get your class started. And this is in the physical brick and mortar building, right? So a bell ringer to get your class started. There's some direct instruction, which is the teacher providing input to the students, right? And that at most in a physical classroom should be 15 minutes. More like 10, but 15 minutes max. Then you would give your kids an opportunity to process the content that you just presented. You'd ask them maybe some higher order or elaborative questions to push their thinking. They'd then record or represent their knowledge in some sort of way, and they do a reflection or exit ticket. So that's the cycle of instruction over a piece of content in a brick and mortar building. In this remote learning experience, we're still expecting that type of instruction to happen, but the difference is you might present your 10-minute instruction, and then if you have that 45-minute block of time allocated, you could certainly stay in the Google Meet to answer questions. You could release the kids to go process. They could be expected to turn in an assignment to you, but it's not where you're going to have to fill 45 minutes of worth of time in content. It's 45 minutes from start to finish on what would be expected of a student, from checking in with you and doing their attendance check-in thing, watching your lecture, and doing whatever assignment they're doing. So I hope that makes sense as far as what that looks like, the environment of educating in that mode. Now, you know, John mentioned a 20-minute video. The other thing I think too, and we talked about this morning, John, I think we're not gonna have as difficult of a time getting kids to engage in the environment if we're cognizant of the types of assignments we're giving, right?
Agreed.
So if you want to speak to that, I know you spoke to it a bit this morning about, you know, if this just becomes a worksheet, but.
Yeah, well, I think it goes along with your next slide, which is talking about transformation, because we really have this opportunity to transform what we're doing in the classroom. So, you know, we know right now that the assessments are not happening this year. So we have 2 months where we can really think about different ways to be creative in what we're teaching our students. Now, again, this first week, you're going to have to start with the basics, you know, get your footing down. But next week, maybe start branching out and start thinking about things like project-based learning, where you're giving students a real-world question where they can solve it. Kaylin and I talked about possibly having kids creating TikTok-like videos, where they do a TikTok-like video on washing their hands or staying inside, which is part of a unit on viruses or pandemics, which they're pretty interested in right now. So coming up with assignments that are relevant to them instead of your standard worksheet or quiz that they can Google any answer on. Kaylin, keep going with transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really exciting time. It's a little daunting, but super exciting. And like I mentioned before, this is going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be a little bit of discomfort at first, but in order for us to grow, and we have a tremendous opportunity here to grow professionally, we've got to step outside of our comfort zone. So this is that golden opportunity right now, like John mentioned. We don't have a test, right? And so many years, teachers have told me, and this is what I'm so excited about, but at the same time, I feel like there's this like a bit of paralysis, like, well, what do I do because I don't have a test? Teachers have been looking for this opportunity for years. Well, Kaylin, if I didn't have a test, well, here it is. Here's the opportunity. So let's do something innovative. Let's do something new. Let's apply creative solutions to things. because we never had this opportunity before. We may have sent kids home with something and say, hey, can you watch this video? And we've attempted to flip our classrooms, right? A lot of that conversation was going on for years, but the equity issues were there, right? We knew that certain kids didn't have devices, or we knew certain kids didn't have access to internet at home, or whatever it might be that served as a bit of a roadblock for engaging in those opportunities that you wanted to in the past. And now we can blow the doors off this thing. So I think that this is really exciting because it's going to be a time of intense growth professionally. So as John mentioned, let's try some different challenges, real world or problem-based opportunities. I know as a science teacher, right, we could talk about pathogens and the difference between viruses and bacteria and fungi and parasites, and we could be reading graphs and looking at projections and expectancies. We could be looking at data, sources of data or articles, and deciphering whether they're valid sources. Pandemics in history and how they've affected things over time, or debates over vaccinations. And there's so much content right now that could be relevant and real world for kids. As you transform your classroom, just keep in mind what John said. You know, be cognizant of the types of assignments you're giving. We want to be realistic with our expectations, but know that we've been given this amazing opportunity to connect with our students in a whole new context. And I think that's really exciting. And as we go through this process, be good to yourself too. You got to be good to your kids, of course, and you always are. As educators, right, we always put our kids above us, but you got to be good to yourself and expect, like I said, those obstacles and those bumps in the road. Forgive yourself already. Do it right now. Forgive yourself for the mistake you're going to make tomorrow, because it's going to happen, right? This is all new. And in order for our students to grow and for us to grow, we've got to be willing to fail forward and create that safe space. Now, everyone at the district, we're here to catch you. That's our job, right? And it's okay. We're going to get through this. I promise you, at the end of the day, this is going to make you a better educator.
So thank you so much, Kaylin. I appreciate you for doing this for us. It doesn't look like there were many questions, and we're already over time, but we do want to add one quick thing here at the end, that Kaylin and I are coming up with some other ideas for live streams in addition to the ones Ed Tech are doing, kind of doing this collaboration with curriculum in several different ways. So some of the things that we're thinking about is, how do you handle discussions in this new world? She talked a little bit about discussion stems earlier, but really, how do you have a quality discussion when everyone's in a Google Meet together? And how can we have, discussion that actually is meaningful as well? So keep an eye out on that EdTech training website. That's where everything will be posted for the webinars that we are hosting. And other than that, I appreciate you, Kaylin, for doing this for us. And if you have any last words.
I hope you guys have a fantastic day tomorrow. Fantastic. And just remember, you're focused on routines and expectations and the SEL piece tomorrow. Tomorrow is not a day for content. You haven't even checked in with them. And have a great day. Find out what they've been doing. They want to see you. So I hope you put your face out there.
Yeah. And yep, and we're here to help in any way we can. So thanks so much and have a great day.